Hello and welcome to the Capital Conversation with me, Michael Hayman. Now today is a very special show. It's all about Brexit. For Britain, the defining issue of our time. The vote to leave the European Union was won on a knife edge. And while the nation voted out, London voted in. Little wonder then that opinions are running very high indeed. And today's an opportunity for us to share some of those views with you from previous episodes, the dreams and the nightmares. First up, let's take a look at the dreamers. And kicking us off is Helena Morrissey, the city investment guru, who says even though we voted out, we'll never walk alone.
I think the most important thing is that we all have to be, whatever side we voted on at the referendum, we all have to be pro-Brexit at this stage. This is happening, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to make a success of it. I do think as well, we often look a bit very one-dimensionally. It's all about, leaving the single market, and it's all about, the challenges that brings, or so you would believe from reading the papers sometimes. But actually, obviously, it's one of many challenges or opportunities, if you see it like that, that the country faces.
Is it an opportunity, do you think?
Well, I do think so. I mean, we don't spend a lot of time talking about that, and I think that's a shame. We do have some of the world-class offerings. Financial services, fintech, professional services, 50% of contracts are written in English law. I mean, we have a lot of advantages, and yet we seem to do ourselves down a lot. As we leave the EU, then obviously dependent on how that's struck, then we will have more degrees of freedom. And in a world where there's a lot of change, we do need to have trade relationships with other countries. We do need to be really quite entrepreneurial and nimble to compete.
But when you hear somebody like Michael Bloomberg, one of the most successful entrepreneurs on the planet, say that Brexit is the stupidest thing a country has ever done after opening his billion-dollar new headquarters in London, is he just plain wrong?
Well, I did see the wonderful headquarters, and Michael Bloomberg did take me on a little tour of the building, and during that, we asked him, did he regret building the building? And he said, no, I think London will still be the preeminent financial centre in Europe. So, I think people...
But he did say this, the stupidest thing.
Well, I did question him about, how Mr., T-R-U-M-P fitted in with all of that. And he said, until. But actually, obviously, everyone has their opinion. And I think, my position was much more around what kind of world are we moving into? And actually also having seen... when people have a consensus running up to the financial crisis, people had very clear, this is all going to go on forever. Leverage was the way of the world. And then it all came crashing down. And I do think we need to question and have that diversity of thought.
I mean, many of the sort of city grandees, overwhelmingly, they were pro-Remain. Yet you decided to break ranks with that sort of view. Was there a particular factor that made you think we'd be better off outside?
Well, I felt that we needed to look really hard at whether staying in the EU was the progressive option. My own direct experience of dealing, whether it's on financial regulation, whether it's on the women on boards issues, is that actually, the dream is not necessarily the reality. And I think that we needed to have that debate. And all I was trying to do, it wasn't so much that I was trying to sort of, defy everybody else, but say, actually, let's talk about actually what is our actual experience of being part of the EU and the global world that we live in. And I don't think we've still really had that conversation, which is a shame.
If I could wave a magic wand and give you that vote again, would you still vote for Brexit, knowing everything you now know?
Absolutely, yes. I also think that we haven't spent a lot of time. Reality is the EU is not, completely stable and intact, and the status quo was never an option. I mean, we've obviously got Catalonia,
we've
got,
right.
something, there needed to be, and we also were very sort of difficult family members, weren't we, all along? We needed to resolve the issue. The shame was that we weren't better prepared, whether it be civil service or government and so forth, there wasn't plans drawn up. And but I do think that actually there is an opportunity now for us to look to solve not just challenges around Brexit, but also think about low productivity, the economic inequalities, regional disparity. There are a lot of things that have been unresolved in this country for a while.
But a lot of people are particularly worried about London in this. It finds itself out of step with the rest of the country in the way that the country voted. It finds a lot of question marks about its match fitness, if you like, for being a home for ambitious businesses of the future. Do you sense that enough is being done to ensure that this next chapter, this new life for London, is being properly prepared for?
Well, I think it's actually down to all of us. I mean, that's the thing. We can self-determine our own destiny and our prosperity to a degree. And that's why it does gall me that, I find it galling that there is so much negativity. Anyone would think that this country had nothing to offer, that no one ever came near us, ever bought anything from us. They buy things from us because we have things to offer, not because we're part of the EU or because we have a trading relationship with the country. They buy things because we have services and goods to offer. So I think we need to, collective, if we can, actually endeavour to make the best of it, whatever one's belief set. And actually,
so it's just a case of a negative mindset at the moment.
Well, I think it can become a bit self-fulfilling. Anything in life, anything that I've ever done has required me to believe in the objective and to then work towards it. And if you start by saying, "Oh, I don't think we'll get there," "Oh no, despite this, because of that, we'll never achieve anything," unfortunately, it's more likely to come true. And then I don't think anyone turning around and saying, "I told you so," when people are unemployed is really great victory.
So the message for London is get a positive mental attitude.
Well, I would love, why not? Don't we have things to celebrate? Don't we have great things about us culturally, in business and so forth? You mentioned about companies not wanting to set up here, but, Apple and Google all put new investment into the country since we voted. It's a bit odd that they believe and we don't,
The ability to adapt and just get on with it has always been part of our history. And, I can see ahead that people are racking their brains, they're beginning to think their way through things, and we're seeing the type of spirit that made London great in the first place coming through. So I prefer to think on the positive side always. And, my job is to motivate our team, keep driving the performance for Hotel Chocolat. So I'm the last person that should be a doom monger. I think our role is to keep people happy with delicious chocolates and keep them empowered to perform well.
Did you spot any of these signals? Things are always easier in hindsight.
No. That was part of the reason for writing it, was because I could see populism lifting and happening and people were not ready for it. I could see Brexit was going to unfold and people were saying, it'll never happen. I'm like, it's definitely going to happen.
We've also seen this absolute tidal wave of volatility in terms of voting preferences, in terms of old realities swept away, in terms of making sense of that. When you look at these referendums, when you look at these votes that are happening in the States and Britain, what should we take out of that in terms of what happens next for our respective countries?
Well, it's happening way beyond that. It's happening on the continent now. Look at the Italians are voting for the five-star populist party. Increasingly, we see it in Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands, and Germany. Austria. So in other words, this is not a local phenomena. And I would argue that it's in China as well. And one reason we see Xi Jinping really tightening control over power is because he detects the same thing.
You described Brexit as a future that's brighter than we realise.
Absolutely.
Why?
Well, the British economy, what drives me mad is this idea the British economy is going to slide into the North Sea and sink. This is insane. It's the 5th biggest economy in the world. It's hugely innovative. It leads in so many areas. It's very strong in manufacturing. It's leading in artificial intelligence. In biotech, it's a global center. So again, I come back to what are the investors saying? They're saying, I'm going to keep putting as much or more capital in the UK as ever before.
But there are not many big voices in business that would echo that sentiment.
I find it interesting. And why? Because they'd rather hang on to rules that are old and they understand than take the opportunity to build a new framework that would be better. Here's the bottom line. The whole world trusts the British to create a rule system that works. It's you guys who created the Magna Carta. It's only the British who lack confidence in their own future. The whole rest of the world is like, the Queen on the money says, invest.
Well, I think one of the things that happened is that the devaluation that took place immediately after Brexit, I think, has made UK companies, make UK companies more attractive, and we've seen a bit of that go on. But I think ultimately what we have to do, in the UK is we have to stand on our own 2 feet and be able to get the right talent, have the right capital infrastructure to invest and create those businesses and support companies in the best way that we can. So the basics of what we need to do hasn't changed. We just need to ensure that we don't forget that.
Well, there you have it. The dreamers have spoken. And was that enough to keep the nightmares at bay? Well, when we come back, we'll hear from those that feel we got it all wrong and that the worst is yet to come. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Capital Conversation with me, Michael Hayman. You're watching a special episode today as we take a look at the hopes and fears of Brexit. Now, in, out, shake it all about. Let's find out why Brexit should leave us shaken and stirred. Leading the mix is Gina Miller, the entrepreneur who challenged the government in the courts over Brexit. She feels that a democratic vote has led to a profoundly undemocratic outcome.
Well, Mr. Redwood, I think, should ought to go and buy a new calculator, because the point is, I didn't appeal the case. It was the government who appealed it. But there's something much more fundamental in my case in Brexit. It was about ensuring that a precedent wasn't set where any government in future, whatever your persuasion, but any government could bypass Parliament. Because at the end of the day, parliamentary sovereignty is the very thing that all the leavers were banging on at the table about. So they should have respected this case more than anything else.
Are we in a better place on Brexit because of what you have done, do you think, than if you hadn't actually gone to court?
Well, if I could flip that round and say, imagine the government had used royal prerogative, triggered Article 50, it wasn't in line with our constitutional requirements, it could have thrown up all sorts of cases, all sorts of legal challenges. We could have possibly been thrown out of the EU with any sort of negotiated period. It would have been a much, much worse place than we are now. Basically, my case made sure it was done legally.
In terms of where this all leaves us, in terms of we are emerging into this new chapter, a new chapter where Brexit will happen, how optimistic do you feel about Britain's prospects in this new and changing set of circumstances?
I'm not as optimistic as I would be, because I think the way it's being delivered by our politicians is actually shameful, because they're putting themselves before the country. And all we have to do is try and get the best deal, because our country is not a thing. There are people, real people, young, old, are going to be affected by this. And that I am distressed that people are being forgotten in all of this.
Is it irreversible, the work that they're doing, or is there still time to make it good, do you think?
I would worry that if we get to the end of this year and we haven't made significant progress and we've run out of time, and the only logical thing would be for us to extend the 2-year period, because you can't undo 44 years in 10 months.
I sit on the board of the LMR, which basically represents 13% of the working population.
And the LMR just...
LMR is a ridiculous name. It's the Association of Licensed Managed Retailers. It stands for everyone who basically runs pubs, restaurants, clubs, hotels.
And what are they? Are they in or out?
That's a really good question. They are apolitical, because they have to be, but I think the concerns are really around what's going to happen in terms of immigration.
But surely a lot of your people are sat there thinking, I might not even be here in a few years' time.
Yeah, well, the reality is most of them are, if they're here, they're not leaving at the moment. But my big worry is that when they do leave, they will never get replaced. And we employ extraordinary people. On the day of Brexit, I just got up and I just didn't think about it. I went around 10 restaurants, one after another, basically talking to as many people I could in restaurants, and they were absolutely devastated.
How ready do you think London is as a city for Brexit?
I think we're woefully underprepared. I think there will be a huge scramble for people who are qualified to do jobs. I think the unskilled work is also going to be desperately in demand. I think we have a major problem, which I'm not sure the government has a clue about how to face.
You had a 100-foot poster on your roof saying "Stronger in."
Yeah.
Do you think more businesses should have expressed a view in the run-up to the vote?
Undoubtedly. I think, unfortunately, a lot of businesses were misled, and, the referendum came round very quickly. It was very close, and I believe if, the propaganda, the lies, and all the conspiracies didn't go on, then I think would be remaining.
Do you think it's got worse for the UK and for London since that vote?
Undoubtedly. Well, certainly the economy is dropping. A lot of businesses are starting to suffer. Restaurants are quiet in London. I think sales are down in the shops of 5%. Car sales are down. So, I mean, you ain't got to have a brain in your head to work out things are not getting better. But I think we've got to get on with it, do the best job we can do and make the most of it.
And what about the Pimlico plumbers themselves? I mean, were you in step with your workforce on this issue?
Well, of course. I mean, we've already...
Well, they were all Remainers, the team.
I really don't know. I don't go politically involved with them, but all I'm saying is London construction sites will come to a standstill if they stop free movement. Coffee shops, all the bits. We need people from the UK to keep London booming.
London is, in many ways, still the capital of the world in an interesting way. It's a big city and it's an important city, and I fear that with Brexit the UK may lose some influence on the world stage. I do have some concerns around Brexit. I know it's gotten harder to recruit talented engineers. When you think about
Is that the main thing? Is it just an immigration point, or is there more to it?
No, I think, well, that's the main thing, but there is more to it. But
because
I do think
you get a sense. I mean, every time you speak to a tech entrepreneur, they're freaked out about the European Union largely in terms of our leaving it. And yet, these are the ultimate free marketeers. They're the people that you would have thought wanted less regulation, not more. What's driving the kind of Brexit worries amongst tech entrepreneurs?
Well, I mean, I think a big piece of it is about the immigration piece. You know, London competes as a city with, you know, Berlin, Barcelona. These are great cities as well. And if you think you're a talented young software developer in Poland and you're thinking, well, I need to move to the big city, wherever that is, you might have thought a few years ago, obviously London is the answer, to come and join a tech startup in London and build something amazing. And now you think, well, I want to settle down, I'm going to have kids and family. I feel like I might get kicked out in a few years' time from London. Berlin's pretty appealing, and so I think we're seeing
how real
people
is the risk?
make that
Do you think London might lose its crown as the technology capital of Europe?
I do, and I don't know.
And how soon do you think?
I think it's hard to say. I think it's really hard to say. I mean, I think a lot of that does depend on the as yet incredibly murky details of what does Brexit look like, what does immigration look like after. You know, if you talk to a Brexiteer, they'll assure you, oh no, we're going to have room for talented developers and things like, well, make the visa process easy. But of course, the devil's in the details, so we'll see.
So if you were to have the ear of Theresa May right now, in terms of what can she do to help maintain this critical sector and its importance to the UK economy, how does confidence get maintained?
That's a tough thing. I mean, Theresa, please just admit it. You don't like Brexit. Let's just all call it off. It's a stupid idea.
So a second referendum.
No, actually, I do think a second referendum should have been on the agenda all along. I think that what the original referendum should have said is, you know, we want to go out and negotiate as hard as we can for the best possible deal, and then the public gets to approve that deal.
So when you look at things like the Brexit vote, the Trump vote, are they based on, is the success of those votes based on the fact that people were misled, do you think? How far would you go?
I think it played a huge role. I think there was a huge role played by misleading information, you know, famously the bus.
Were they lies?
And all that. Yeah, there were definitely lies. But also the rise, and it's very concerning, the rise of manipulating fear of the other, the outsider, sort of misleading information about immigrants and crime in the U.S. in particular was a huge problem. You know, the crime rate among immigrants is actually significantly lower than other groups, and yet it was played up like the Mexicans are just sending in criminals and so on. So all that kind of misinformation, people are victimized by it.
We will only know if it's a done deal once we see the terms of the deal. And I think once Theresa May comes back with the deal, it's sent up to the British people. I don't believe in a second referendum, but I do believe the British people should have the right to decide whether or not it's worth leaving the EU. Once we know what it really is.
For you personally, in terms of why you got involved with the Remain sort of, you know, side, why you were such a sort of very visible face of it, what inspired you to sort of go really political, if you will?
Yes, because when I looked at all of the various outcomes, there was nothing that showed that leaving the EU would be better for Britain on any level. None of it. And if you look at the real concerns, the problems that people have with the EU, and a lot of those concerns are valid, those are concerns that we could continue to campaign on and put pressure on the EU over a period of time. So if you look at the costs in terms of the financial costs, if you look at what it's going to mean for Britain in terms of our standing in the world, and if you look at the options that have now been taken off the table for our young people, there is no way this thing was worth it.
Do you think business could have spoken out more strongly about Brexit?
I have to say, I thought British business in general was terrible over Brexit. There were so many of them that were far too scared to actually in any way put their head above the parapet because they thought that it might offend some shareholders or whatever, and also because they thought it was a done deal. The problem was everybody thought this thing was fine and, you know, Remain would win and then whatever. But actually now they're feeling it themselves.
What should they be doing now, do you think?
Well, I think the most important thing that needs to happen is for everybody to understand what really will happen if we leave. At the moment, a lot of businesses are not being honest. They're saying, oh yeah, of course we're going to stay, when we know they're not. We know that many of them are secretly already looking at office space in Europe and so on. Be honest so that British people really understand what this could actually mean for them.
Well, that's all for this week's Brexit special. And if you're optimistic, Britain's next chapter is about opportunity, innovation and freedom. And if you're not, it's about an attack on democracy, weakened influence and even deception. What's for certain is that this is a debate that is set to run on, and we'll make sure that business gets its say right here on the Capital Conversation. I'll see you next time.